record and we'll get. All right, hi everyone. My name is Tyson. I'm here with Allison. We're here to talk about community placemaking, specifically at the Lougheed House. Allison, I'll let yourself introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself a little bit more, and then we'll get into what we have presented for you.
Sure. So like Tyson said, my name's Allison. I'm the senior manager of Lougheed House Reimagined at Lougheed House. So we are redoing all of our exhibitions and programs. If you didn't know, Lougheed House is a museum, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So yeah, I've been working there for about a year and met Tyson very shortly after I started at Lougheed House, and have learned a lot from him and the other community kind of placemaking stuff that he does. So very excited to chat a little bit about Lougheed House today.
Great. And my name is Tyson. I am co-lead with Leanne of CDLI. My passion is really community building, specifically with a little bit of disruption, a little bit of resisting sort of like our sort of normal ways of doing things and how we build community. And it was really cool to work on this project. I feel very connected to the Lougheed House now after going through the process and just seeing how my own relationship with that space has changed. And so that's really about placemaking, is really helping people change and shift their thoughts and feelings around a particular place. But formally speaking, placemaking is a community-driven process. And how I like to really how I like to really think about it is it's recreating new memories in a space. And so that for me is an idea around placemaking. It could be a bench, it could be a new building, it could be a very and it's about using a practice of observation and listening and asking questions to better understand the needs and aspirations of a community. So it could be highlighting a physical space, a cultural space, a social, like the social connections that really help define that space. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about what we did at the Lougheed House. Most of you know what Community Development Learning Initiative is, so I won't go into that. But really, and right here is that idea of like it strengthens those connections. I used memory, other it might be social connections, it could be our ability to understand place. And so really it helps us gather better together. For some reason, just on one sort of logistic note, Allison, I'm using the Miro presentation board. So if you're seeing that it's not sliding as quickly, it's because it's a little slow on my end, but.
All right, so I can talk a little bit about Lougheed House and just give some context. Lougheed House and the Beltline in particular, although a lot of folks might be more familiar with that neighborhood. So Lougheed House is a national provincial historic site. It's located in downtown Calgary in the Beltline. It's an accredited museum, a landmark, and a gathering space. So just a bit of history. It was built in 1891. So the house has quite a long history in Calgary. It was first the main residence of a Canadian senator, James Lougheed, and his wife, who was from a prominent Métis fur trading family, Isabella. And so they lived in this house for about 30, 40 years. When the Great Depression hit, the Lougheeds lost a lot of their money. And so this house was used for different things when the city of Calgary operated it, starting in kind of the 1940s. So it was used as a training school for youth and for young women. Then during the First World War, the Second World War, it was used as a Canadian Women's Army Corps in a barracks. And then up until around the late 1970s, it was used as a Canadian Red Cross blood donor clinic. So the house has been used for lots of different things over time. In the late 1990s, they started to restore the house and the gardens around it. So it opened as a museum in 2005. That's the shortest history of the house. And today, It's a really important landmark in the Beltline, like I said. The Beltline history kind of grew around this house, which is really interesting. It was named after the original streetcar route in the area. And today, Lougheed House looks a little bit out of place in the Beltline, but it kind of exists as one of the oldest houses in Calgary on its original location as well. And so we've done a lot of different work with communities and kind of thinking about placemaking. Mostly through exhibits and working with kind of different community partners. But maybe I'll wait for a couple slides down to talk more specifically about what we actually did with Tyson and the CDLI.
So one of the really important pieces that we really need to consider when we talk about placemaking, and specifically, I think, within this project, is the third space. So this term is coined by Ray Oldenburg, who was a sociologist. He kind of breaks down most people's lives into three spaces. So the first space, which is sort of our family life, our family connections, how we maneuver and navigate through that system. Then we have our work spaces as well, and our connections there. And then this third space of our human interactions, which usually can be identified as places where we bump into ongoing familiar faces. So that could be parks, coffee shops, libraries, church, local pubs. And so we really thinking about what would it mean for this idea of reimagining Lougheed House as this third space. As Allison sort of alluded to, it's not only is the building itself a space where people connect, but also the garden around it. And so what happens in these spaces? And how does the Lougheed House show up as that third space for people? What does that actually look like? How do we start to understand what it is that Lougheed House is as a third space? So one of the ways that we look to kind of determine what that relationship is asset-based community development. So ABCD is a model that acknowledges and utilizes the strengths of social relationships, people's gifts and skills to create meaningful change. So what ABCD really looks like is using those strengths, those resources that already exist in a community that can be mobilized to have that community change. So these gifts, and we'll talk about how they kind of manifest themselves in our process, but these gifts really can be found in a couple of ways. One way is through the strengths that we all have as individuals. So Allison is a historian, for example. That's a strength that she offers. I could also be from my strength, it could be that I really enjoy asset mapping, which is something that we did to help understand Lougheed House's relationship to that third space. And so whenever a community comes together in powerful and satisfying ways, it's because two things have happened. First, they have found out about each other's gifts, and second, they have made new connections based on those gifts. So it's the sum of those two connections that we use to really express that asset-based community development. So I really like quoting this idea of start with what you have and build on what you know. And so our first part of our process was asset mapping. So one of the things that we did was we walked around the neighborhood with a few different board members and other community folks that have a relationship already with the Lougheed House, just to sort of look and explore what exactly is possible here in the neighborhood. A couple things that we really found was around well, I'll just go to the next slide here, sorry. Kind of has a better sense of that. So there's sort of five different categories of asset mapping. So there's the individual people, there's those assets, the informal associations, so there's small groups or unpaid, community associations, book clubs, parent groups, local institutions like the library, local government, businesses, physical assets like land, buildings, one of the things that we found when we walked through the Beltline was how many parks that exist in a very small corridor, but what kind of opportunities are there, connections and exchanges. So also looking around and observing what are some possibility relationships that exist and opportunities that can start to help us think about what's possible. So there's no one way to asset map. It can take many forms and have many different kind of visual appearances. So it's also really important to note that the point is not the asset map itself. An asset map is not community building. And it's not always the point of the exercise, but rather it's a tool to help us build connections and surface the strengths of the community that can be explored and engaged upon. So a few ways that I've mapped in my past has been through chalk making, maybe specific themes. So although we looked through Beltline as what's possible for the Lougheed House, it could be the tree canopy. It could be how many bike racks there are. It could be how many businesses. It could be uh, maybe how certain types of people might engage with a neighborhood. So you can be really specific or be really broad. In our process of through our walk, we looked at more broadly, but what are the amenities and opportunities? And it's really important when we talk about asset mapping that we look at this idea of looking at what's strong and not what's wrong. And so looking at the assets. So often I think we can walk around a neighborhood or think about deficits. We really try to be in that strength-based approach. So here are a couple of things that we sort of started to connect as we walked through. So throughout here, there's different events, there's parks, um, um, there's potential relationships. So there's a big relationship with people with their dogs, the Beltline Neighborhood Association, pride events, we have here about 5 different parks that we walk through, and each one had a various different social dynamic for people, lighting, churches, and so really trying to understand what exactly is what's available and opportunity here in the neighborhood. Before I start, does anyone have any questions or any things that they think they wanted to kind of maybe add?
I might
have
add
a
one thing.
question.
Oh,
Go ahead, Allison.
Oh, no. Well, all I was going to add is just talking about the asset mapping. It might seem like common sense that a museum would look to the immediate kind of geographical neighborhood and area that we're around. But it's something that Lougheed House really hadn't done, and a lot of museums don't. So when they think about community, they often think about like different cultural groups to work with. But in terms of like our kind of geographical, physical community, it sounds very straightforward and obvious, and probably was to Tyson, but it wasn't to us. So this asset mapping process and using this tool was like a real kind of light bulb moment for a lot of us working at Lougheed House, thinking about, how we can bring value to this neighborhood and be a place for folks in the Beltline. So it seems simple, but it was a pretty great kind of revelation for us.
My question is, can this tool also be used to identify what we're lacking? So, for example, if you had an idea of what your community had or represented, and then you realize, oh, actually, it is not what I had in mind, and I would like to develop certain areas or incorporate more art or certain things. So do the
totally.
reverse. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some way. So I think it's really also important of it's. I think I find it really helpful to really manage that sort of deficit attitudes, right? So I think for me it would be for example, let's walk around and for example, Bump is a really great artistic, creative events that happen in the Beltline. And so at one point there was conversations about well, we have all of these exposed walls that aren't being utilized. So that's the and looking at what's possible here. So it ended up becoming, we have a strength in our neighborhood to actually start to put more art on the walls versus saying let's walk around and we have nothing to, we have no art, we have no creativity. We actually, there's all these really great opportunities. So I think it's, so as much as, so it's really easy to kind of get caught up in what we don't have. It's yes, let's look at what's possible, and then from there being able to then identify um uh what we can do next. I think so oftentimes when we think about let's say it's really easy to have taken that, maybe the mural piece, and go, wow, we have no art, we have no murals on any of these walls, and then be done with it, and make that walk, and not really try to sort of engage with what are some of those possibilities, what are some of those connections points. But yes, to your point, yeah, it's really easy to, it's I think it's also about being able to look at kind of what don't we have, and now what can overlap with those possibilities. If there's no other questions, we'll go on to the next slide here. So then our next sort of part that we did, and this is the really crucial part, I think, Carolina, as well, is that when you start to identify your own skills and the community's skills, and overlap that with the asset mapping of what's available, what's possible, that's kind of where you get that real sweet spot, is being able to pair both of those things together. So what we did when we met the second time, we actually did some sort of capacity strength building assessment, and really started to look at what are sort of the strengths of us as people on the board, and trying to understand how can we show up for our community through this asset map. And so that one of the processes that we worked through was head, hands, heart. So we provided people with what's your head? So what's your knowledge? What's your hands? So what's your skills? And what's your heart? What are you passionate about? And so people walked around and just shared like what their purpose, what their mission is. Why are they being involved? What really matters to them? And I think what's really important is similar to what Allison said. Sometimes it was being able to really understand the gifts aren't always, if not asked, we sometimes don't always know what we can offer and contribute. And so there were so many gifts I think that were undiscovered, and trying new things may help us figure out what they are. And I think also another really important point about sort of that gifts is a person may not always be ready to kind of share their gifts, and that's totally okay. But the more practice we have of identifying what's possible, what can you do, the more we can help to build the capacity of those in our community to provide those gifts. And so, yeah, once again, the sweet spot of asset mapping is to take your map of what you know exists and the strengths that a community has, and that will really help be your sort of guiding North Star of where you go next. And I believe we have a little bit of a sheet here of what we sort of started to kind of get a sense for after doing both of these two things, which was here you had maybe people who are more maybe like leaders, or at least people who may be more engaged in the Lougheed House. Um, uh, and then people who were maybe more commuters, so people who just drove through the neighborhood, not maybe recognizing um uh their relationship maybe to Lougheed House, and that's totally okay. But we also have dogs on here. It's a big place where dogs get to convene, and using the park. Then you have board, and you have staff, you have the government, and then they start to help sort of tell a story about what's possible in for the Lougheed House to show up in the community of Beltline. So this idea that it's kind of like this backyard, this sort of living room space, that it can tell the histories and the story of that area. That people like Allison and the other volunteers are really open-minded and really interested in wanting to engage with the neighborhood. This idea of like a community center being built, but also knowing that there's a relationship between people's relationship with the park that's the property of Lougheed House and the actual physical house itself, and so how people might be more engaged with um the park and being out there than maybe the house itself. I like to kind of share this story as an example that I have is Lougheed House started doing really fun trivia nights. And so the last one I went to, I wanted to go to the last one actually, but it didn't end up happening for me. But I went to one that was uh, Pride related for Calgary Pride. And my friend who never really knew much about Lougheed House, I invited him to it. We went to the trivia night, and then over the last little couple months, whenever we're in the area, he'll always either mention that was such a fun event, or one time we were chatting, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm next to the place that we had the trivia night." And so what he's saying is Lougheed House, but I think it's really about being able to provide that's a form of placemaking, is creating those new memories, new opportunities to engage with the space, and that placemaking does have to evolve, and even like thinking about like, oh yeah, what does it mean for us to be in community? How do we actually share that space? And so those are some of the conversations that we started to have. And Allison, I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts or anything you want to add to.
I mean, I don't think so. I think you kind of covered it. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions from folks? Twyla or Farzana, Carolina? Anything about sort of the process that you're interested to know about?
No, it's pretty forward, Tyson.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, one of the actions that came out of our conversations that we had was this community mailbox.
Yeah, so one of the things that we were kind of looking at is just really seeing if we could get feedback from the community, especially the outdoor area and the gardens are much more utilized by folks than the actual house itself. So just kind of starting a dialogue and a conversation with this mailbox. And it's been really well used. Unfortunately, this version of the mailbox did disappear. But we have another one and it's good and it's still there. It's a little bit more securely fastened. But you know, really getting some interesting feedback about how folks perceive the site, what they would like to see more of. And sometimes people just tell us how they feel, and that's great too, to show that, again, we kind of, even though we're this organization, we care about the community that we're in. So this has been, it's a very, again, a kind of simple change and simple thing that we made. But what it will allow us to do is to scale that up. Now that we kind of have this kind of very basic small relationship, you know, we're looking at doing larger scale kind of community placemaking in the garden to really make it a place where folks feel welcome and that it's being created with, by, and for people in the Beltline. So that's kind of the next bigger phase. But it all started with a mailbox, which is, it's good to show that even like simple things can be really effective.
Mm-hmm. I think what's really important too about placemaking that I think oftentimes people get caught up in is, oh well, if we do this, then it might get stolen or it might get vandalized, or how are we going to make it secure, or is this what people are going to actually really want or enjoy? And part of that all of that discourse is really important to that conversation about what do people really want. I think oftentimes people get really maybe hesitant to actually do placemaking or to try to start that without it all being with all of well, with having all of the the crosses teed, right? It's like we want to make sure we have it's secure, that everyone's going to enjoy it, that it will be there for the next 10 years. And the idea of placemaking is that it evolves, just like the Lougheed House. It has evolved and will continue to. And so and sometimes even placemaking is temporal in nature. That's actually part of the value of it, is that it's really about experimenting and prototyping new things as well. And it's really about sort of having the attitude of being really curious about what's possible. And engaging community members in different ways, because not every type of permanent installation will be something that everyone uses. And so trying to help have that conversation and being willing to open to like expand what's possible. Any other questions anyone has? Is this something that we use the sort of the box, the Calgary City of Calgary box? That's sort of maybe a general starting point. But hey, this is what something that already exists kind of looks like.
When do you started implementing all these little things? When did this start?
So I reached out to Tyson. It was the last spring, so spring of 2023. We did our asset mapping, in May and June of 2023. And then we started this, as you can see, that was in the winter. So we put this up probably winter of 2023, 2024. And yeah, like Tyson said, this is kind of like the catalyst for us. And so we have some plans to further prototype over the next year. So Lougheed House has an anniversary coming up in 2025. It's the 20th anniversary of Lougheed House being a museum, which is pretty cool. So we're working kind of towards this year to do some sort of pop-up, again, that kind of temporary stuff to just see how folks want to use the outdoor space in different seasons. And then hopefully we'll have some better kind of idea of that when we have our anniversary and we can do some other cool stuff. So yeah, this in total, it will have been at least like a 2-year kind of project, but it will be going on beyond that as well.
And are you funding this on your own or applying for grants?
It is grant-based. So Lougheed House is a nonprofit and registered charity. So the mailbox we covered, it was like $20. So that was fine. But for the other stuff, we have applied for some funding.
And I think that's actually a really great point and question, Carolina, is that I think sometimes with placemaking, we think that it has to be a big project, but I've done quite a few different placemaking projects in my own, even for my, because I'm a nerd about this stuff, but like just seeing what happens when taking like little projects from like the dollar store and putting things together and seeing what happens, and like more around art and creativity in public space. But I think part of that too is just like, oh, well, we actually don't need as much to start to get the momentum to get that ball rolling and being able to sort of go, oh, what actually could a very accurate thing be for a use of, you know, $10,000 or $20,000 project because it's been well informed by the community. I think, and so asset mapping is something that can happen for free, and it's a really great conversation to have that, to be really intentional about, oh, where do I go? What's available here? Who should I connect with? What are the other green spaces in the area already doing that and have certain amenities that we don't have? So how can we start to do that? And so I think it can be really informal or it's a really formal process to try and understand what kind of placemaking projects actually make sense before you go into the, you know, the $50,000, $30,000, $40,000 bigger projects.
I might add to that, Tyson, too. Lougheed House also could not do any of this alone because, again, we're very small staff. So it shows that you don't need a big organization to do this as well. But like having those community partners and working with folks, I mean, like the CDLI, but also we work with the Beltline Neighborhoods Association a lot, the Beltline BIA as well. So those folks are key to kind of capacity building, and we're just knowing that we're not trying to like do something outrageous by ourselves, that we can do small steps, and we actually have community partners to work with is really important.
We have one last sort of part that we'll talk and share about, but just before I begin, anyone else have any questions? do you see yourself maybe doing something like this in your own community? I know for Zana, you are you do a lot of really great community work where you are, and I know Twyla also as a community social worker. Are there some things that you maybe have done similar or would like to do?
Yeah, I was just more interested to learn a little bit more just about the placemaking because I know that we find, especially in the downtown core and in Beltline, we're seeing kind of like a removal of spaces for communities to kind of be able to be and gather. So everything that and we're going to be seeing more and more residents kind of moving in with a lot of the refurbishment or transition to kind of housing of a lot of the business high rises. And so just kind of trying to think about like how can we be more creative about using spaces like museums or different places like that for community to gather, because we kind of sometimes forget that there's a lot of residents that live in the downtown core and they're not often engaged. We usually think of the downtown as a destination community where there's a lot of folks residing there. So I'm just taking it all in and thinking about some possible like other locations in downtown and how these can be placemaked or used alternatively for community use as well. So yeah, just really appreciating learning about your process.
Do you two know each other, Twyla and Allison?
No, I
But
don't
I'm
think
not
so.
but I'm not sure. Have you worked with Sylvia Ross though? She's the community social worker with the city for the Beltline.
Oh, okay.
Maybe, I'm not sure. But it would be great to talk with her. I'm also a resident of the Beltline, so I have a double interest in this.
Yeah.
And it's true. One of the things that we've seen is with the growing density of the area, basically our park, it can do okay, but we need, additional amenities and support to make sure we can kind of handle the volume of folks who want to use it and should be using it. So it's a really it's an interesting time in the Beltline and at Lougheed House as well. Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely make sure if you can, I'll put my information in the chat and I can definitely connect you with Sylvia.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think like those are really important too, those connections between, people who are in the neighborhood already or who have been, and like what kind of relationships can we reestablish, and like those networks. So that'd be pretty great. For Zana, I know you had a question.
No, I don't have a question, but it's really great information to take from both of you, Allison and Tyson. Thank you so much.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think also what's really what's really important about placemaking, I think, are just the idea of, especially as in the, Calgary is still, has become more denser and people being in the same spaces, especially in apartment complexes and things like this, that like the importance of places like Lougheed House or other community spaces where people can come to gather is really, really important. So if people don't have, their own maybe front yard or backyard, or it's that these spaces become really, really important for social connections. And if we design it in really intentional ways, it will actually begin to sort of foster those connections for other people, because it's not really I don't think it is in Calgary, it's our default to just be outside and hope that we can get engaged with people. I think we need to really design it for those types of bumping spaces, which is that third space. I know we have about 5 minutes left, so we're thinking also about sort of the future of museums and placemaking. And what are some of the possibilities there? And as someone who's been learning a lot more about museums in the last since meeting with Allison, yeah, really got me thinking and excited about like what could these spaces be to hold history, but also the future in both in both spaces. And so for us, it's really looking at one of the ways that we've talked about it is that well, practically, I think placemaking allows for more room, I guess, in the efforts as a museum. This idea that like there's Lougheed House, the physical house, And then what does that do to program or to experiment outside of those four walls? It actually really increases what's available to a space. I think when we think of museums or art galleries, we think of it being four walls. And so moving beyond that, I think it's really kind of exciting for me to see that evolve. And then I think another thing that that is kind of right into is this idea of social change, because it allows for museums to be a platform to be more accessible, for people to share in that experience. So to kind of feel like they actually have more of an output or to kind of express themselves in that space as well. Of like what's possible, how can we build these things together? It's not just sort of collections from the past, it's also about what's maybe currently happening. And so that idea of social change, I think, is really important there too. And this idea that museums as community members, it's that I think the building structure in itself is placemaking. It's taking those components in a way for the public to have relationships and build connections. So having that engagement, having that discourse, it can be an invitation to people to come and create that relationship, to be that space. But yeah, that's a little bit about some social change pieces. Alex, is there anything else you want to sort of say or provide, or anything cool things that are happening at the Lougheed House that people can get?
Oh, I'm supposed to promote now. Oh no.
Sure, why not?
We do have another trivia night coming up next Thursday, June 20th. So check that out. They've been filling up completely full. So it's been really cool process to see. And we have a TP raising as well on June 23rd. So that's a Sunday, and we're working with Elder Joyce Healy. There will be TP raising and Indigenous games from about 11 to 3 p.m. So you can check that out. And then July, there's lots more happening, but I can't remember any of it. So, but it's good.
No worries. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for your time. We are about to go on a 10-minute break. So I appreciate Allison for coming in, popping in, having this conversation with us. And hopefully you folks can step into the Lougheed House at some point, and whether it's the garden or the actual house, and see what's happening there. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so
Bye.
much.